What's up, Archons? I'm Flightless Pheasant, and now that you're here, we can strap on our spelunking gear and begin our perilous descent. But before we do, I'm a huge fan of Keyforge, and if you are too, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell, as I'll be bringing you even more lore from Keyforge and the Crucible. Today I'm going to be continuing a series called Houses of the Crucible, where I break down the various factions that are a part of the Keyforge lore. Each house is unique, but they all work together with Archons to collect amber, forge keys, open vaults, and loot the treasures inside. Every house brings with it its own design inspirations, hierarchy, membership requirements, ideals, technology, and uses for amber. And this series is all about breaking it all down so that you too can appreciate the unique world that is the Crucible. Today, we're going to be talking about House Dis. House Dis is a subterranean faction of demons that live just below the surface of the Crucible. They draw their name from the name of that realm, as shown by the various gateways that lead to Dis, a fiery place below the surface. Most of the art inspiration for House Dis comes from various horror movie tropes, with spikes and chains and other terrifying paraphernalia being incredibly common among the demons of Dis. Right down to an It clone. Seriously, this is practically right out of the movie. House Dis also carries a lot of these horror tropes over to its mechanics, where it's all about taking away resources from your opponent, whether that means making them discard cards, purging their cards, or reducing the number of cards they have in hand, or taking their amber away. Dis is all about denying your opponent choices, limiting their scope, and making it so that they don't have as many things they can do on their turn. It's almost like it's trying to create a cloud of darkness, narrowing the fear and terror as they get closer to their inevitable defeat. House Dis membership is made up almost entirely of demons. Scary, part cybernetic monster men that seem to live below ground and that feed on the strong emotions of other creatures. Emotions that they harvest and store for later consumption. There's also some lesser creatures called imps that are members of House Dis, though their actual sentience or even membership is kind of questionable, but they are adorable little buggers. No denying that. The hierarchy of House Dis is one of the most rigid in all of the Crucible, with their structure being very tiered and stratified, and every member acknowledging those above them. At the very top, you have Lord Invidious, a powerful and imposing figure who rules over all of the rest of the demons of Dis. Just below him is his Council of Sins, 7 demons named after the 7 deadly sins. Just below them, you have the Overlords, who are powerful individual demons with their own cadre of supporters who work for their benefit. Below that, you have the majority of the demons, who are basically stratified by age and experience and sometimes size. And at the bottom of the Dis hierarchy are the imps, who, whenever there's no demons around, pretty much seem to just do whatever chaotic crazy thing they feel like, including putting on hats. If one wanted to join House Dis, they probably wouldn't be able to, if for no other reason than no one's ever found a successful way of communicating with the members of House Dis. Every universal translator that's ever been attempted has come back with just nonsense in terms of understanding what House Dis wants, and although they seem to be able to communicate with each other, as they do have a noticeable hierarchy, there's no one who's been able to determine how they do that, because there's no signs of pheromones, quantum entanglement, radio communication, or any other known form of communication. So if you did want to join, you'd be struck by a pretty strong language barrier. Not to mention their desire to eat every strong emotion you ever had. The demons of House Dis seem to spend most of their time collecting the strong emotions they feed on. They go to places where violent events are going to occur, or where people have gathered in large groups to feed on the negative emotions that they either create themselves or that are already being generated by that location. Then they capture those emotions to feed on later. Though some people claim that this process also takes a piece of the target's soul, There's no strong evidence to support this, but there's also no strong evidence to refute it, and a couple of really terrifying examples of what sure looks like a soul coming out of somebody. The members of House Dis mostly stick to themselves, and don't really interact with most of the other houses very often, with a couple of exceptions. They have been known to participate in trade, or to spend time in merchant bazaars and other places like that, where they tend to mostly show interest in objects of sentimental value or the trade of memories and emotions over anything else. When it comes to technology, Dis is particularly impressive for its cybernetic augmentations that in some cases are so extensive that the members are practically robots and not even really cyborgs at all. In fact, their cybernetics are really designed to give them a terrifying silhouette and to give them energy blades and scythes and other weapons of just terrifying design. It really seems like the core concept behind all of their technological advancements is, what's the scariest way I can do insert thing here. Though they did also create the imps, which are mostly technological beings with a little bit of amber at their core, and they do have some larger robots and some forges and some other really scary pieces of machinery that they keep down in Dis that I would really prefer they keep down there and not bring up to the surface where the rest of us might get incinerated or trapped in a screaming book. House Dis does have at least one very unique use for amber, and that is to store the strong emotions of other people so that they can feed on them later. They tend to use this to put little shards of amber into their clothing and outfits. These aren't really power sources. They're actually more like capsules that they can put their food in for later. So when they jump scare you, they collect all of that fear and can take it down to eat later. When it comes to House Dis's relationship with the other houses of the Crucible, it's probably no surprise that they tend to not get along. Almost every house has a negative opinion of House Dis, but House Sanctum takes this dislike to another level. They believe that if a demon were to suck out your soul, you'd never be able to ascend to the next rank in the Sanctum Order, and they have thus put multiple crusades to wipe out the demons, largely unsuccessfully. Also, there's some evidence that House Dis might interact with House Aquaiden as one of the few houses willing to trade some of the more eccentric things that they would like with strong emotional ties. Also, while there's no evidence to support this, I personally really love the idea that House Dis and House Unfathomable would get along really well, as I just really like the idea of slasher horror meets eldritch horror for a team-up of horror. House Dis is definitely one of the more interesting houses, with some very fascinating lore having to do with their unique membership, their stratification, their uses for amber, and generally just the way they interact with everyone else on the Crucible. I really enjoy the way that those things are reflected in their denial mechanics. It really makes them feel like a house that's focused on making life difficult for your opponent, more than helping itself or building upward. I really hope that you enjoyed this deep dive into House Dis, and now that we're taking off our spelunking gear, I hope you will come along with me on my next journey, when we take a dive into late-stage capitalism and the desert world of Aquaiden. Until next time, I'm Flightless Pheasant, and this has been Houses of the Crucible.